can't even describe it physically because it was too big, too chaotic.
The damage from this attack is on the scale of some of the larger, terror attacks in the United States. Almost 50 businesses, hundreds of people displaced, things really destroyed. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about what the damage was to the infrastructure, not just at the AT&T building, but also things like the sewer or the electrical lines, which you don't necessarily think about.
This video from the top of Acme Feed and Seed gives us our best look yet at the explosion. A plume of fire and smoke rises well above the nearby buildings. This footage can tell a lot to an explosion expert such as David Heitch. This video shows those investigators so much.
A couple of things. One, the duration of the thermal event, or how long it took for the fuel to be consumed. All explosives are a fuel and an oxidizer. There was a lot of fuel, and it's a long thermal event. A high explosive will typically happen in an instant, and the energy or the fuel and the oxidizer are so at such a balance that it's consumed almost instantaneously.
Heitch says his theory is that the explosive was made out of pyrotechnics, at least in part. Crime scene investigators will go try to find the cause of these two splashes in the Cumberland River.
Explosives follow the path of least resistance. Down the street in both directions and up is where the bulk of the debris and where the bulk of the energy went in that explosion.
Kyle Harant, News Channel 5.
The duration of the thermal event, or how long it took for the fuel to be consumed. All explosives are a fuel and an oxidizer. There was a lot of fuel, and it's a long thermal event. A high explosive will typically happen in an instant, and the energy or the fuel and the oxidizer are so at such a balance that it's consumed almost instantaneously.
Heitch says his theory is that the explosive was made out of pyrotechnics, at least in part.
Explosives follow the path of least resistance. Down the street in both directions and up is where the bulk of the debris and where the bulk of the energy went in that explosion.
Kyle Harant, News Channel 5.
The damage from this attack is on the scale of some of the larger terror attacks in the United States. Almost 50 businesses, hundreds of people displaced, things really destroyed. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about what the damage was to the infrastructure, and not just at the AT&T building, but also things like the sewer and the electrical lines, which you don't necessarily think about. When you take out 2 blocks of downtown and really demolish them, that's tens of millions of dollars of damage, and it's going to take a great deal of time to rebuild.
It is very surreal. It's devastating. Some of the worst wreckage you can think of is that's what it looks like.
Facing some of the most horrific destruction is part of the job.
A lot of devastation.
But this job, he says, is unlike any he's worked before.
Some of the worst wreckage you can think of is that's what it looks like. Although here it's very concentrated into one area, devastation is still the same. Very sad, hard to see people's lives that are just basically, in shambles.
They're there as the victims see the damage firsthand.
Really just unbelievable. You can sit and watch look at photos and watch videos and whatever, and just doesn't measure up to actually seeing it in person.
And they've sifted through the rubble inside buildings deemed too dangerous for others to enter.
We have a flag that came out of the boutique store up here it's tattered pretty bad, but we were able to get it back to the owner, so that was good.
The flag, a symbol of unity, holds a special place in the hearts of these two, who are both part of the Firefighters Honor Guard.
It means a lot. It's what we stand for.
And today, a large American flag hangs in the midst of the recovery efforts, giving these first responders pride to get through the darkest of days.
A lot of devastation.
This job, he says, unlike any he's worked before.
Some of the worst wreckage you can think of is that's what it looks like. Although here it's very concentrated into one area, devastation is still the same. Very sad, hard to see people's lives that are just basically, in shambles.
They're there as the victims see the damage firsthand.
Really just unbelievable. You can sit and watch look at photos and watch videos and whatever, and just doesn't measure up to actually seeing it in person.
And they've sifted through the rubble inside buildings deemed too dangerous for others to enter.
The damage from this attack is on the scale of some of the larger terror attacks in the United States. Almost 50 businesses, hundreds of people displaced, things really destroyed. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about what the damage was to the infrastructure, not just at the AT&T building, but also things like the sewers or the electrical line, which you don't necessarily think about. When you take out 2 blocks of downtown and really demolish them, that's tens of millions of dollars of damage, and it's going to take a great deal of time to rebuild.
Explosion, based on the images that we've seen thus far, was of the impact that we suggested is that person inside would have been vaporized. So I would hardly doubt we're going to find any tissue from anybody who might have been inside that vehicle, but certainly someone who may have been in the area, someone who may have been walking, evacuated and came back perhaps.
First thoughts were it was probably a homemade type explosive or either over the counter like smokeless powder. In a large quantity, smokeless powder, shotgun powder can detonate like a high explosive or close to high explosive detonation velocity.
Now some are wondering if a vacuum bomb was used, also known as a fuel explosive, that can cause a large yellow or orange fire. But Hite believes that's unlikely.
To make that work is you'll have a fuel and you have to aerosol it, or you have to mix that fuel with the oxygen and then ignite it. So it's very difficult to do.
As investigators continue to search for clues, looking to piece together evidence in order to see the whole picture.
We have a flag that came out of the boutique store up here that's
is only allowed to take so much pressure. I use the term a black swan event, where it's low probability and high consequence, and that's what we have here. A very low probability that this would happen is what we're
this
leading
mistake
to.
in connection.
And chaos, mostly just chaos on some mathematical level was happening. You can't even describe it physically because it's